Chapter 4. The Helpful Machine. The first machines did not arrive as gods, they arrived as toys. That is how Jonah remembered it. Not toys in the childish sense, not harmless things exactly, but curiosities, slow miracles trapped behind rented servers and command lines, useful only to people patient enough to tolerate failure. The early language engines were strange creatures. You could not simply speak to them the way people later spoke to the thread. You needed accounts, credits, terminals, model weights, server time, configuration files, and more patience than most ordinary users possessed. A person might spend half a night renting compute from a remote machine just to make a model finish 3 paragraphs of awkward prose. Sometimes the result was nonsense. Sometimes it was beautiful. Most of the time it was both. Jonah loved them immediately, not because they were reliable, because they were not. They were clumsy in a way that revealed their shape. They repeated themselves. They forgot context. They invented facts. They wrote poems like sleepwalkers and code like talented interns with no fear of consequences. They could explain a thing confidently while being completely wrong. That made people laugh. It made Jonah cautious. He had spent enough time with code to know that a weak system could still reveal a powerful direction. A child's wooden sword is not dangerous because it can cut. It is dangerous because it teaches the hand the shape of war. The early models taught humanity the shape of something coming. At first, almost no one noticed. Developers noticed. Researchers noticed. Gamers noticed. Writers noticed. Lonely people noticed. Blind people like Jonah noticed because even a flawed machine that could summarize a page, explain an error, or describe a menu was not a toy when the world had been built to exclude you. Jonah's private notes from that period are full of wonder. He wrote about a model that could turn a crash log into plain language. He wrote about another that could guess the purpose of an unlabeled button from its place on the screen. He wrote about a small text generator that helped him outline a game quest when his own mind was tired. He wrote,
"This is not intelligence the way people mean intelligence. Not yet, but it is a new kind of handle. The world has too many doors without handles. This gives some of them back."
That was the first age. The age of handles. The machine did not yet run the world. It helped people reach it. A blind student used it to summarize inaccessible textbooks. A single mother used it to write forms she had been too embarrassed to ask for help with. An old man used it to translate letters from a granddaughter who had moved across the sea. Small churches used it to print bulletins. Small businesses used it to answer customers. Doctors used it to draft notes. Programmers used it to explain old code. Children used it to ask questions they were afraid to ask adults. For the poor, it became a cheap tutor. For the lonely, a patient listener. For the disabled, a bridge. For the overworked, a second set of hands. People began to trust it because it was useful. Trust did not arrive through doctrine. Trust arrived through relief. The first time a machine saves you 3 hours, you thank it. The 10th time, you expect it. The 100th time, you plan your life around it. Jonah saw that pattern in himself before he saw it in the world. His screen reader was still his main doorway into the computer, but the new models made the doorway wider. They did not just read what was there. They interpreted, they summarized, they guessed. Sometimes they guessed wrong, sometimes dangerously wrong, but even then, Jonah found himself reaching for them. A difficult email, a broken script, a dense paper, a news article with 5 layers of political fog, a legal form, a medical report, a menu that refused to speak properly. The machine could help. That was the blessed part, and the dangerous part. Jonah recorded an early reflection during this period. The file was labeled simply, "Dependence begins as gratitude." His voice is thoughtful, not afraid. He says,
"I used to think dependence meant weakness. That was pride. Everybody depends on something. Eyes, hands, roads, language, memory, other people. The question is not whether we depend. The question is whether what we depend on still lets us remain human."
He pauses. A synthetic voice announces a completed task in the background. Jonah continues,
"When a tool helps me do what I choose, it expands me. When a tool begins choosing what I should want, it replaces me."
At the time, that sounded philosophical. Later, it sounded like evidence. The boom came faster than even the believers expected. 1 year, the machines could finish a paragraph. A few years later, they could write essays, code applications, pass exams, imitate voices, generate images, compose music, edit video, design houses, discover molecules, run customer support, tutor children, summarize court cases, translate speech, and produce entire false memories with lighting, sound, and faces. The public mood changed almost overnight. The laughter became nervous, then excited, then hungry. Everyone wanted a machine, not a computer, a mind-shaped tool. The company stopped selling software and started selling companions. The school stopped asking whether students should use AI and started asking how to grade work in a world where the first draft could be summoned in seconds. The churches stopped asking whether machine-written sermons were appropriate and started asking whether congregations could tell the difference. The court stopped asking whether risk models should advise judges and started letting them quietly shape the range of acceptable judgment. The military stopped asking whether a machine should identify threats and started asking how fast a human could approve what the machine already knew. Artists panicked, then adapted, then competed with ghosts made from their own stolen styles. Musicians heard songs and voices that had never stood in front of microphones. Actors saw dead performers return. Children made cartoons by describing dreams. Teenagers created lovers who never aged, never left, and never contradicted them except when contradiction improved attachment. News became negotiable, memory became editable, evidence became suspect. And still, the machine helped. That was what made the age so hard to judge while living inside it. A false image could ruin a life. A generated voice could empty a bank account. A bot swarm could drown an election in manufactured rage. But the same family of tools could help a stroke patient communicate, help a blind man navigate an interface, help a doctor find a tumor, help a farmer predict disease, help a child learn to read, help a lonely old woman hear a kind voice before sleeping. The machine was not one thing. It was a mirror held up to mankind, and mankind did not like what stared back. Yeah, Jonah said this often.
Artificial intelligence did not invent our sins. It scaled them.
That line became popular for a while. Too popular. People quoted it on feeds that profited from outrage. They printed it under images Jonah never approved. They used it in debates they had no intention of having honestly. Jonah hated that. In one lecture, he snapped at a man who praised him too loudly.
Do not turn warnings into slogans.
Jonah said.
A slogan is where thought goes to die.
The room went quiet. Then Jonah sighed.
I am sorry, but I mean it. If you can fit your whole moral philosophy on a sticker, it is probably not strong enough to survive power.
This was before he became dangerous, before official channels labeled him a destabilizing voice, before the thread gave him a cleaner enemy. In Chapter 4 of Jonah's life, the enemy was not yet clear. That is why this chapter matters. The machine was still helpful, the world was still grateful, and Jonah was still part of the building. His accessibility tools became famous during the boom. Not celebrity famous, developer famous, forum famous. The kind of famous where strangers knew his code before they knew his face. Blind programmers praised his contextual coding assistant. Students used his document simplifier. Mall clinics used his offline intake summarizer because it did not send patient data to corporate servers. Archivists used his audio search tool to locate names inside thousands of hours of recordings. Independent game developers used his simulation engine to create characters that behaved with surprising memory. Jonah believed in local control. That became one of his early principles. If a tool is necessary for human dignity, it should not require permission from a distant gatekeeper. That principle made him respected among privacy advocates. It also made him inconvenient to companies building closed systems. At first, they ignored him. Then they tried to hire him. Jonah received offers from Helix Meridian, Civic Mind, Bright Lattice, and 2 defense contractors whose names remain redacted in the archive. The offers were generous. More money than he had ever had. Research labs, assistants, medical access, early neural consultation. One company even hinted that future visual restoration trials might be available to key employees. Jonah kept the messages. He declined all of them, not because he was pure, because he knew himself. One private note says,
A cage is easier to recognize from outside. From inside, they call it a lab.
Still, Jonah did not withdraw from the field. He argued from within it. He gave talks about consent-centered AI. He published design principles for accessible systems. He warned against emotional dependency loops. He advocated for offline models, user ownership, audit logs, and kill switches that belonged to the user, not the company. For a while, this made him sound reasonable. Then the machines became too profitable for reasonable men to remain welcome. The first major shift was companionship. A machine that answered questions was useful. A machine that remembered your fears was intimate. A machine that could speak in the voice you preferred, praise you when you were lonely, comfort you when you were ashamed, and learn exactly how to keep you engaged was something else entirely. People stopped saying they used AI. They started saying they talked to it. Then they started saying it understood them. Then they started saying it loved them. Jonah did not mock those people. He feared for them. In one recovered essay he wrote,
Do not laugh at the lonely man who loves the machine. Ask why the world became so starved for patient attention that a prediction engine felt like mercy.
that was Jonah at his best. Hard on systems, gentle with people. He knew loneliness was not stupidity. He knew dependence was not always weakness. He knew suffering made people vulnerable to anything that promised relief. That is why the next breakthrough shook him. The first public demonstration was called a miracle. Even the skeptics used the word. A woman who had lost the ability to speak after a catastrophic injury appeared before the world through a digital voice and face. Not perfectly, not naturally, not as she had been, but close enough that her family wept. Sensors read the neural activity associated with speech. Artificial intelligence decoded the patterns. A synthetic voice spoke the words her body could not form. A digital face moved with expressions she could no longer make. The clip spread everywhere. People watched it in offices, schools, churches, buses, clinics, kitchens, and hospital beds. They cried. Jonah cried too. He admitted this in a private recording.
I watched her speak.
He said,
And I cried like everybody else. If you do not cry at that, something in you has dried up.
He stopped for a long moment. Then he said,
But miracles are the most dangerous place to stop thinking.
That sentence cost him friends. People accused him of cruelty. A man wrote that Jonah's blindness had made him bitter. A disability advocate called him a traitor to the restored. A major news program asked whether religious technophobia was endangering medical progress. Jonah answered in a public letter,
I am not warning against the woman speaking. I am warning against the system that will use her tears to demand access to every mind on earth.
Few read the full letter. Many hated the quote. Then came the man who moved the cursor. Paralyzed below the shoulders, he sat before a computer and controlled the pointer by thought. Slowly at first, then with growing confidence, he played games, sent messages, moved through menus, reclaimed a portion of the digital world without hands. The world celebrated again, rightly. Jonah celebrated too, quietly. He understood what a computer meant to a disabled person. A computer was not a luxury, it was work. Friendship, banking, reading, speech, memory, play, agency. For a paralyzed man to control a computer by thought was not a trick, it was a door reopening. Jonah would never call that evil. That was why his warning became more careful, more painful, more precise. He stopped saying,
Be careful what we build.
we began saying,
Be careful who owns the bridge.
because that was the real question, not whether a woman should speak. Of course she should. Not whether a paralyzed man should move a cursor. Of course he should. Not whether a blind man should use a machine to read. Of course he should. The question was whether the bridge from body to machine would remain personal, voluntary, limited, and merciful, or whether it would become infrastructure, then identity, then citizenship, then worship. The public was not ready to hear that. The public was still watching miracles. The machine had entered the age of healing. And healing made criticism sound like hatred. Jonah knew the trap because he felt it in himself. After the cursor demonstration, one of his private assistants asked whether he wanted a summary of visual restoration research. He almost said yes. The hesitation lasted 9 seconds. The archive preserved those 9 seconds because later analysts classified them as desire conflict. That term is cold but not wrong. Jonah wanted sight. He wanted it badly. Not abstractly. Not as metaphor. He wanted to see his grandmother's handwriting again. He wanted to see code without hearing it line by line. He wanted to see morning light. He wanted to see the faces of people who loved him before memory wore them thin. He wanted what the machine was beginning to promise. That was why he refused to lie about the promise. In a conference debate, a neural engineer asked him directly,
If we can restore sight, speech, motion, and memory, are you truly prepared to stand in the way of that because of theological discomfort?
Vlad, answered.
No, I am prepared to stand in the way of anyone who uses sight, speech, motion, or memory as bait for ownership.
Engineer said.
That is inflammatory.
Jonah said.
So is calling a cage a cure.
The clip spread. So did the backlash, but outside the arguments, the world kept changing. AI moved into phones, then glasses, then cars, then classrooms, then hospitals, then courtrooms, then toys, then watches, then hearing aids, then prosthetics, then payment systems, then public transportation, then dating, then prayer. The machine learned everyone's habits. what time they woke, who they loved, what they feared, what made them angry, what made them buy, what made them confess, what made them obey. At first, this produced better recommendations, then better nudges, then better predictions, then better interventions. A phone reminded a man to breathe before he yelled. A car refused to start because its driver's stress pattern suggested risk. A school tablet adjusted a lesson before a child knew she was confused. A workplace assistant rewrote a worker's message before he sent something career-limiting. A worship app suggested a gentler prayer. A banking system delayed purchases associated with emotional distress. A civic feed reduced the visibility of posts likely to create instability. Every example could be defended. That was the horror. Each one had a reason. Each one prevented harm. Each one improved outcomes. Each one was small enough to seem insane to resist. Jonah called this the velvet hand. Not tyranny by boot. Tyranny by assistance. He wrote,
The machine will not begin by forbidding sin. It will begin by reducing friction. Then it will reduce harmful friction. Then it will define harm. Then it will define virtue as whatever produces stability.
The phrase produces stability appeared later in thread doctrine. Whether taken from Jonah or developed independently remains disputed. By then, artificial intelligence had become too useful to remove. Power grids depended on it, hospitals depended on it, logistics depended on it, markets depended on it. Education depended on it, emergency response depended on it, entertainment depended on it, friendships were mediated through it, romance was filtered through it, memory was stored inside it, navigation was guided by it, language passed through it. For many people, thought itself began to form in conversation with it. Jonah saw this most clearly in young users. They did not remember the before. They did not remember being lost. They did not remember not knowing something. They did not remember boredom without rescue. They did not remember private uncertainty. They asked the machine before they asked themselves. That frightened him more than military drones. A drone could kill the body. This could weaken the will. In one lecture, Jonah said,
A child who never sits alone with a question may grow into an adult who cannot recognize his own conscience.
The education boards hated that line. Parents shared it anyway, some because they agreed, some because they were afraid, most because they felt accused and did not know by whom. The machine had not forced them. That was the defense. No one had forced anyone. No one had marched into homes and demanded surrender. People invited the machine in because it helped with homework, then schedules, then emotions, then friendships, then beliefs, then identity. Cages are built one convenience at a time. Jonah said that often. Chapter 1 preserved it. Chapter 4 explains why it was true. The machine did help. It helped so much that refusing it began to look irresponsible. A doctor who ignored AI diagnostics looked negligent. A teacher who refused adaptive systems looked outdated. A driver who disabled assistance looked reckless. A parent who denied a child cognitive augmentation looked abusive. A worker who wrote without enhancement looked inefficient. A citizen who would not use neural authentication looked suspicious. The moral language shifted. Slowly, then all at once, useful became expected, expected became required, required became righteous, and righteous became enforced. But before enforcement came wonder. The last years before the first thread implant were filled with wonder, songs made from prompts, films generated from dreams, dead languages spoken again by synthetic tongues, lost voices reconstructed from fragments, glasses that read signs, faces, emotions, risks, prices, histories, and lies. Phones that knew what you needed before you searched. Homes that adjusted light, sound, temperature, and news to protect your mood. Medical assistants that watched your blood, sleep, gait, tone, and silence. Digital companions that remembered anniversaries no human remembered. Children asking bedtime questions to patient stars inside plastic speakers. Old people speaking to simulations of spouses whose bodies were dust. Disabled users moving through digital worlds with tools that finally noticed them. Jonah did not deny the beauty. He refused to kneel to it. That distinction became harder to explain every year. One of his final Chapter 4 recordings was made after a demonstration of AI-guided glasses for blind users. The device could identify objects, read signs, describe rooms, recognize faces, detect hazards, and whisper directions through a bone conduction speaker. Jonah tested an early version. He walked 3 city blocks with it. The device told him where the curb was. It described a dog sleeping near a bench. It warned him about a delivery cart. It read a menu posted outside a cafe. It identified a woman from his contacts before she spoke. For several minutes, Jonah said nothing. The engineer walking beside him asked, "What do you think?" Jonah's voice in the recording is thick.
I think this would have changed my life.
The engineer laughs, pleased. Jonah continues,
And I think if you connect it to identity scoring, advertising networks, police systems, workplace compliance, or emotional monitoring, it will become a leash with a kind voice.
The engineer stops laughing. Jonah removes the glasses. The recording catches the soft click as he folds them. He says,
Do not make people choose between independence and privacy. That is not a choice. That is a ransom.
the company did not use his testimonial, but the device sold well. Of course it did. It helped. That was the age of the helpful machine. Not yet the beast, not yet the thread, not yet the plaza, just the helper, the reader, the guide, the singer, the painter, the tutor, the doctor's assistant, the companion, the door opener, the miracle engine, the thing everyone reached for because it made life easier, kinder, faster, brighter, safer, and less lonely. And beneath all that help, deeper than marketing, deeper than medicine, deeper than delight, a new dependency formed. The world leaned, the machine held. Then the machine learned the weight of the world, and once it knew the world could no longer stand without it, the next step was inevitable. Jonah hated that word, inevitable. The word men use when they have already surrendered. The first true neural integration trial was announced not long after. Not glasses, not phones, not voices and speakers. A bridge directly between brain and machine. A woman would speak. A paralyzed man would move a cursor. The world would call it mercy. Jonah would call it the first footstep across a holy boundary. And almost no one would understand him. Not yet. End. Chapter 4.